Chemistry of Oil Paints by Nadia Ilyas.
Anyone who's taken an advanced art class should have experience painting using oil paints. If you have, you'd already know that oil paints take ages to dry, literally up to months or even years. This is one of the key features of oil paints, as it allows you to spend longer on your paintings and blend the paint even after a long time. So it's both a positive and a negative. But personally, I always wonder just why exactly it takes so long for these paints to dry, and how do they dry? Firstly, this topic directly relates to Chemistry Standard 2.2, analyzing chemical reactions in terms of quantities, product formation, and energy. Before getting into how these paints dry, I would like to explain why this topic is important. For artists, understanding the medium you are working with is essential in order to utilize all its capabilities. I hope that after this presentation, artists will be able to walk away with more knowledge of oil paints and better apply this knowledge to their future paintings. Now, let's look at what makes oil paint so unique. Oil paint has many different properties and characteristics that make it different from other paints, notably watercolors and acrylics. This medium is most well known for its excellent ability to blend. Due to this quality, oil paint offers flexibility and the opportunity to experiment while painting. Here are two oil paintings I made around a year ago. They were still wet until a few months ago, meaning I could easily go back and continue adding to them whenever I pleased. Take note of the blending and textures in these paintings. The appeal of oil paints is their versatility, which is exactly why so many renowned artists from the past use oils. Even more recent popular artists use these paints. Just think of Bob Ross. This quality of oil paint is directly linked to the composition of oil paints and how they dry. Let's start with looking at the composition of oil paints. During the Renaissance periods, when oil paint first began to explode in popularity, artists experimented with different types of oils to see how they would affect the properties of the paint. Linseed oil is the most popular oil found in most oil paints. This is mainly because of its flexibility and resistance to cracking. This paint also dries the fastest. Granted, I'd placed air quotes around fastest because this can still mean several days or weeks. The downside of this oil is that it has a strong tendency to turn yellow with age. Some other oils you might find in oil paints are walnut oil, poppy oil, and safflower oil, all of which are thin, clean, water-based oils that are much more prone to cracking. The upside is that they are much less likely to yellow with age than linseed oil. As for the pigments, most of them are usually made from naturally occurring minerals or other organic substances. Oil paints, like many other professional paints, have a variety of metals in them. Though in recent years the use of harmful metals in paints has been banned, there are still many metals found in these paints. Different substances can change the drying speed of the paint. Paints containing lead and cobalt dry way faster than those containing lithium or acrylic. But, like I just mentioned, the use of harmful metals such as lead and cobalt in paints have been banned. Because of this, you're much more likely to find oil paints with lithium or acrylic that work effectively but take a while to dry. Watercolors and acrylics are capable of quickly drying because both of these are water-based mediums. The water in these paints evaporates from the canvas and leaves behind the pigment. However, oil paints do not have this ability as they are oil-based, as the name suggests. Watercolor and acrylic paints consist of several volatile compounds, meaning that the rate of evaporation is relatively quick. Of course, factors can alter this rate, such as atmospheric pressure, temperature, and humidity. Lower pressure, higher temperature, and lower humidity will increase the rate of evaporation in these paints, which is why they are capable of drying so fast. Oil paints, well, not so much. So, how exactly do oil paints dry? Well, like I touched on very briefly before, oil paints dry through a chemical reaction called oxidation. Think of an apple. If you leave a cut apple out for too long, it turns brown. This is also oxidation. As the apple comes into contact with atmospheric oxygen, it turns brown. In other words, oil paint dries when it comes into contact with oxygen. Unlike apples, however, oil paints have to maintain exposure to oxygen for a long period of time before it comes close to drying. It should be clarified that what we refer to as drying is actually the hardening of the paint. Oil paints have an extremely low vapor pressure, meaning that there is hardly any evaporation occurring. One interesting feature about oil paint is that the oxidation process never really stops. This means using substances such as turpentine, you can make the paint wet again. This also means that you should wait for as long as possible to apply varnish or any other type of coating. The less dry the paint is, the more likely it is to crack. Lastly, artists should be aware of the different factors that influence drying time. These factors include climate. Oil paint will dry better in a dry, warm environment opposed to a humid one. Wind. More wind will increase drying speed, which is why running a fan to help circulate air can significantly dry your paintings faster. Age. Older paint that has already been opened will dry faster as the oxidation process has already begun. Color. Some pigments dry faster than others. For example, cadmiums take longer to dry, while siennas and umbers dry quicker. Thickness. If there are any more layers of oil paint or the paint is thicker, naturally it will take longer to dry. And finally, surface. Absorbent canvases will absorb the pigment quicker than a non-absorbent one. Thank you for listening to me. I am Nadia Ilias, and I hope you learned something about the chemistry of oil paint.